Three, two, one.
So welcome everybody. This week on Therapy with a Video Gamer, we have a special guest once again. We have Miss Melinda Powers, and she will do the honors of introducing herself and kind of talking about what she focuses on in her practice, just like we did with the last interview. Today's topic is going to be about domestic violence because this is October. We're talking about it for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I want to just give Melinda here a second to take it away and offer anything she'd like to let the audience know about herself, and then we'll get right into the questions. So the floor is yours.
Oh, goodness. Hello, I'm Melinda Powers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am a therapist. That's just a fancy word for mental health therapist. The focus of my practice does actually, crossroads with a lot of domestic violence cases from both ends. I work with trauma victims. I do a lot of work with grief and loss, and I also do some ADHD work too. But the first two, I have clients from both sides of the domestic violence issue. I have my own personal journey with domestic violence, which we'll discuss later, but also just kind of how we can create. So my purpose here today is how we can create awareness about domestic violence, what that actually means, what that looks like, and how we can prevent it.
Thank you for that. And thank you again so much for being here today. I know, you got a million things to do just like I do. It's always kind of a challenge to fit every little thing that we have to do throughout the day. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and speak about this very important issue.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, so in your own words, can you describe to the audience what domestic violence is and what domestic violence is not? And can you also go into a little bit about different terms maybe we might hear to describe what domestic violence is? Because I know I've heard lots of different things that kind of make it interchangeable here and there.
True. And so when you hear the words domestic violence, I think a lot of people instantly think violence, like physical violence, right? In my view, domestic violence is abusive behaviors intended to gain power and control over an intimate partner. So someone you've chosen to share your life with. My view, and the view of the law sometimes is a little different. Sometimes the word intimate partner means like boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever that looks like, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, intimate partner can be a family member. It can be, it can be obviously your significant other, but it's anyone that you've intimately brought into your life that is intentionally using abusive behaviors to gain power and control over you.
Okay, now, so just to clarify really quickly, it sounds like the nature of the relationship doesn't so much matter, like whether it's romantic or platonic. Domestic violence or interpersonal violence is interpersonal violence.
That's my view, because it is, and it's just a power and control game. And it also, it can be in, obviously domestic violence that we look at in this context is intimate partner. So it's someone, you're chosen to share your life with, that type of context. But it also happens within families, right? Domestic violence is domestic. It's in your home. It's something that happens, sometimes on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't have to look like physical abuse. It's psychological abuse, which causes psychological trauma. So it comes in many forms. And I think those are kind of the misconceptions of domestic violence. I have lots of young people that come to me and have completely no idea that they're in an abusive relationship. And it's domestic violence, right?
Sure. Thank you so much for defining that so succinctly. And just to really press the point, could you maybe explain a little bit about what isn't domestic violence? Because I know there's probably some confusion when maybe you're a bystander or if you know somebody and you're thinking, is that? I don't really want to say anything. I don't want to intervene because what if I'm making a big deal out of nothing? So what are some maybe just brief examples of what domestic violence isn't?
Well, that's a good question, because sometimes, intimate partners are very comfortable with each other, right? So one of the signs of domestic violence, in my view, is belittling or like, speaking to someone in kind of in a condescending way. Those are signs of domestic violence. However, there's like gray area there, right? So those people that use sarcasm or maybe like make, off comment kind of jokes with each other, that doesn't necessarily mean it's domestic violence.
Maybe that's just their dynamic. Maybe that's just how they.
Right, exactly. And so that, it's a pattern. It's more than just one thing. So I think that's kind of the message here. Maybe people don't talk to each other kindly or as nicely as they can in relationships, or something like that, you know, or maybe sometimes people yell, you know, there are many cultures. I come from a culture of yellers, you know, so
very loud and animated.
Right, right. I mean, you can see I'm talking with my hands, you know, I'm Italian. We talk loud, we do those things, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, you're a yeller, and so that's the case. It's a pattern of abuse intended to gain power and control. So it's much bigger than just being kind of nasty or saying mean things to one another.
So it sounds like you can't really take one particular, like any one example that could be a sign of domestic violence and kind of just broad brush make that, oh, I'm looking at domestic violence here. Because I can think of kind of some other gray areas. Like, for example, let's say there's been some trust broken between two people.
Right.
You know, maybe part of rebuilding that trust is giving a little bit of extra transparency with mobile devices or computer passwords, that sort of thing. And to the outside, that might look like someone who's really trying to get their thumb on you. They're trying to get their control over you, but that's not necessarily the case.
Agreed. And those are definitely gray areas. And it's all about the equality of the partners, right? So it's all about, if this is our agreement, then that's okay. You know, if it's our agreement that we share passwords, or is there agreement that we look at each other's emails, if that's your agreement, then that's not abusive. It's when one partner says to the other, I am going to do this, or I am going to control this. That's where the abuse comes in. So that's the difference.
Okay, thank you. So can you describe from your professional and personal experience, what are some red flags and signs of domestic violence?
This is my favorite question. And I'm going to use a resource that I really share with all of my clients. And I've found it very helpful because it's very user-friendly. You know, some of our professional lingo kind of gets a little, you know, like, oh gosh, it's confusing, but I like just basic information. And one of my favorite websites is called joinonelove.org. And I'll tell you, it was created by a family who a mother actually, and her daughter was killed by her abuser. And this family has created this amazing organization to create awareness about healthy versus unhealthy relationships. So they kind of have a top 10 of unhealthy behaviors and healthy behaviors that I really use a lot in practice. I share this website with young people, you know, teenagers that are just starting to like develop relationships so they can get an understanding of what does healthy look like? You know, how are we taught that? If you don't have the good fortune of being brought up in a healthy relationship family, sometimes that gets misconstrued, right? So some of the signs are obvious things to me now, but maybe not so obvious, you know, jealousy, because always keeping in mind that power and control is where things shift. So things like jealousy, I spoke a minute ago about belittling, shaming, guilting, manipulation. That's a big word for a lot of things, you know, like manipulating your emotions. If someone's manipulating your emotions, they're going to make you feel bad about their own emotions. They're going to lie. They're going to do things that are very dishonest.
So it sounds like kind of like another word for mind games too.
Lots of mind games. Yes. Gaslighting comes into that, you know, making you believe it's your fault and you're to blame. There's so many unhealthy traits that, and sadly, I think that a lot of people see the red flags, but we've kind of grown to ignore red flags in lots of situations, right? So this is an area where that little voice that says, this isn't quite right, we need to listen to it and turn that volume up. And to kind of, without being overly cautious, kind of look out for these things, because I think that's a big part that we miss too. We're not looking for the signs. We're just rose-colored glasses in love and not looking for anything to be wrong with this human because we love them, right?
Yeah, who wants to actually actively seek out like something that could be potentially unhealthy, but it's something that I am very attached to? No one wants to go and like really sort through those details and admit even to themselves that that's something that could be possibly happening. Because like you said, there's so much shame, there's so much stigma. I'm not going to be that person. That would never happen to me.
Right. I love that you brought that word up, shame. And that's what keeps people trapped in these relationships is shame. To maybe admit to ourselves, like, oh gosh, I got myself into something here. Or shame to have to reach out for help. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the driving forces behind domestic violence is that it's riddled in shame. And so people are afraid or embarrassed or don't know what to do. And so they stay for all the wrong reasons.
The next question, why might someone who wants to leave an abusive relationship take very long time, or maybe not leave at all, even though they feel it's the best choice moving forward with them. Or what's more often the case, they leave, but then they might return several times before it actually sticks.
Great question. One of the statistics I've read is that the victim leaves 7 times on average, leave 7 times before they actually leave. Leaving seems, from the outsider looking in, leaving seems like the obvious answer, right? Like, just leave. Like, what's wrong with him or her? Why would they stay? It's not always that easy. And you have to think about at the core of it, they're in love, or they love this person, right? They don't want the love to end. They want the behaviors to end. And so part of the cycle of abuse is just that. You know, there's like this buildup, and there's usually some sort of incident, whether it's physical or psychological or emotional, whatever it is. And then there's this really nice, like, loving honeymoon, I'm so sorry, reconciliation period, right? And so the I'm sorry's make it, oh gosh, make you remind you, I love this person. Oh, I don't want this to stop. And then it's calm for a while. And then it starts again. So that's the part that people miss. They only see the incident, or they only see the aftermath maybe, but they don't see, and that's where the manipulation and the real, like, dig in and get this person back in my clutches begins. And then it's calm, you know. And oftentimes in violent relationships, domestic violence relationships, the highs and lows are very high. So the good is as good as it's ever been. It's great. It's amazing. And then the low comes. And so you endure the low, because the high is so amazing. You know that high is coming. And that's a hard cycle to break. It's a very hard cycle to break.
And
so
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and not to, you know, draw lines where there aren't any, but it does seem sort of parallel to another situation, like where I'm thinking of times where I might have treated someone for substance abuse, for example, and they keep returning to heroin or meth, whatever their drug of choice is, because, like you said, when the lows are there, the lows suck. But once they get that next fix, either they're normal, baseline, or they're really, really good again. And it's worth suffering most of the time just to get that little piece of hope.
Right. And another misconception, I think sometimes, that people think that people that are in these relationships don't have a good family, or they have no one to go to, or they don't have good friends or whatever. And this is where that shame comes in. You know, this is where I will self-disclose. I myself was in an abusive relationship. It was more emotionally abusive, became physical. I had a hard time leaving, but I came from a perfectly loving family, had plenty of support. I had plenty of ways out. But now at this point in my life, I know it was part of my journey, and it was what needed to happen in my life for me to be the woman that I am today, and sitting here with you and talking about it today. But at the time, you seem like there are no options. And so that's really my message today, is that there are so many options, and there are so many people like you and I just waiting to help people get out of those places, right? And support you. And therapy for me is, sometimes people don't have that ability to instantly get to therapy, and I'll share some other resources, but that kind of is a first step. Just one person, if you just have one person on your team, that really helps.
I agree. And thank you so much for being so open and honest about your own experiences. I know it's very different, kind of advocating for someone versus kind of opening yourself up and sharing that piece with the rest of the world. So I applaud you on your bravery for that. Thank you for being.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think sometimes people, think they're alone in that, and they're not alone in that. There's, to remove that layer of shame, we have to speak out, and we have to share our stories. Is it my proudest moment? No, absolutely not. But it also led me to the path that I needed to understand what happened. How did I get there? I was just going along in life, happy as could be. And, and then one day I was this victim, and I was calling police, and I was in this weird cycle of something I didn't know was happening. So I think it's important to educate people when you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. So, and this is really what I like to share with young people. And I have lots of conversations with as young adolescents, because really, it's a grown-up version of bullying, really, right? And I also like to share that, and we teach this to I teach to little kids, that hurt people, right? So the abuser is often hurting themselves. There's something at the core of them. They're very insecure, very, very insecure. And so something is not quite right with them. and then they spread that across, their victims. But both sides need help. And I think I know I'm talking more about the victim end of this, but I want to, also discuss the abuser end of this too, because we are here to help the abuser just as much as we are the victim, right? And I work with both sides of that. I've had some really great success stories, and those are wins for me, right? When I get to help that abuser turn the page and not be that person anymore. Because I like to believe that humans at our core are good. And, things just happen in life and we start to behave in certain ways, and sometimes we just can't get a hold of it.
Sure. And I think it's a really good point to piggyback on for a second. I wonder if there's anyone else who might be watching right now who might be thinking if maybe this is something they need to look a little bit more closely to. One of the places that might seem obvious to think about to go first would be couples counseling. But I also know with my own experience and just from other things that I've heard, that's not necessarily your first stop if the abuse is still actively happening.
Correct. That's a good point to make. Yes. And it does seem like the natural thing, but then studies have shown that creates more violence or more abuse in the home when you go and then you talk, because that is, that's opening up that whole thing, like, okay, now someone else knows. And so that can lead to another, to more abuse. The couples that I have worked with independently. And then once we were to a safe place after quite some time, then we go forward. Sometimes we never go forward, and sometimes we just continue to work independently and make sure that everyone's safe. So, it does, and that's a big message too. It takes effort from both. Behaviors take a lot of effort to change. So both people have to be willing and really on board to make those changes.
I really like that point that you're making, because it really kind of spells out the point or the difference between fault and responsibility. Because, you think about it, fault is more about blame. It's about, who can I point my finger at to take the brunt of this problem for me because it's something they did. But it's very different from responsibility, which can oftentimes point to the person who has been abused, because responsibility talks about who's going to fix it, whose job is it to fix it. And it might seem like, on a cosmic level, completely unfair that I'm the one who has been enduring all this pain and now I have to do work to try and make this work. That's kind of bullshit.
Right. Totally. I say this to clients all the time. We are all accountable and responsible for ourselves. You cannot change another human. And that's a big part of my message too. You cannot change another human, no matter if they try to make you to believe that you can or that you're responsible. Those are big signs of abuse too. Making the other person believe you're responsible for my emotions, you're responsible for my behaviors. We're all responsible for ourselves, and we can change ourselves. And both sides, victim and abuser, usually have some kind of work they need to do in order to be in a healthy relationship, if you're in that type of relationship.
Right. So even though probably goes without saying that somewhere down the line, if this relationship is to continue, there probably is some couples work at some point, but right. Probably, like we were talking about before, the starting point is that individual work, because there's a reason that the joint work is happening in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have, for this next one, I have a public service announcement that was done in 2015 from the Super Bowl, and it shows a domestic violence scenario where the victim called 911 to have talk to dispatchers through a code of sorts. And what they did was they ordered pizza. And of course, this is, in this particular clip that we're about to play, this is a fictional case, but it actually does have some parallels to a real life case in Oregon. It was a couple years back. I can't think of the exact year, but that actually did happen. So I want to play it just for a second, and then I want to see if I can get your reaction.
Okay.
All right.
Operated on a where's the emergency? 127 Premier. Okay, what's going on there? I went to order a pizza for delivery. Ma'am, you reached 911. This is an emergency line. Large with half pepperoni, half mushroom. You called 911. This is an emergency line. How long it'll be? Okay, ma'am, is everything okay over there? Do you have an emergency or not? Yes. And you're unable to talk because... Right. Is there someone in the room with you? Just say yes or no. Yes. Okay, it looks like I have an officer about a mile from your location. Are there any weapons in your house? No. Can you stay on the phone with me? No. See you soon. Thank you.
All right, so we're back. What did you think?
The first time I've heard it now, so now I cannot cry. But yeah, that's really, I was so, and that call is a real call, right? Is that the one that happened in Oregon?
Well, the one that I just played was the PSA. So
Okay.
I don't think necessarily that was a legitimate call. I think that might have been staged, but it is, like I said, parallel to one that did happen in Oregon. And from that particular one, you can Google, YouTube, or whatever, Oregon pizza call 911, and there's tons and tons of links from different local places that covered it, probably even like national links. But it just talks about this 911 dispatcher in Oregon who almost didn't understand. He almost like hung up, but the lady luckily was able to get him to kind of get on her side about, no, this isn't like I'm actually ordering a pizza. I'm trying to tell you something completely different.
Code. Yeah. I mean, like, so brave. So such a great idea. And I hope that now maybe dispatchers are trained to be looking or listening for that. And hopefully that is a way, because those calls are hard to make, right? Lots of times, even websites and the websites I'll share today, if you go to the website, it will instantly pop up with something that says, if you need to get out of this website, instantly press escape or press X. And it talks about, like, because if someone is gaining power and control, lots of times they're checking things like phones or, your search history and things like that. So it's always obviously about keeping you safe. So, making those calls in code is brilliant. And hopefully, I just hope that that's the message received. I think 911 now, if you call even and hang up, they do call back. And so sometimes you can get that, but in those situations, you have to do what you have to do. And so if you're to the point of call 911,
like a very delicate situation just by nature, because I'm thinking just like what you said, if they were to call back right away after you just hung up, well, what if you hung up because they just walked in the room and now you're putting them in more danger? So it sounds like it's a very like multi-pronged issue that has a multi-pronged solution or multiple solutions to it.
It is. And those are hard calls to make because of all of those factors, right? Is this going to make it worse? Am I going to die? Because the reality is that violence does escalate. One day it might be yelling, one day it might be hitting, one day it might be killing. And that is a reality of this issue and why it is so important to me.
So in 2018, I'm looking at a figure from the Violence Policy Center, and it revealed that 65% of all murder-suicides are perpetrated by intimate partners. So my first question is, do you believe this to be an accurate figure? And secondly, can you elaborate on why?
I do sadly believe that's an accurate figure. A murder-suicide is usually an intimate partner situation. It seems unlikely that it would just one day they decide to kill two people, right? So it escalated from something, right? It escalated from somewhere. This is the topic that's very near and dear to my heart because this painting that's hanging behind me, it was created by a relative of mine, my cousin's daughter, actually. She was killed by her abuser, who then killed himself. And so the statistics show that in violent relationships, in those types of domestic violence, that there is physical violence. If the abuser owns any sort of weapon, a firearm, or anything, that increases your chances of death by 5 times. So 500% is the percentage they use, right? So you have 5 times more likely to die by your abuser if he owns a firearm. And that's a real statistic. That's a real, again, I came from a family that was loving and kind and supportive. So for me to lose a family member in such a way is baffling, right? Here I am, I'm a therapist. I wasn't a therapist then, but I'm a therapist. And so that our family wasn't like that. We weren't the kind of family that didn't talk to each other and love each other. And her mother knew this was happening, but didn't know what to do. And that's where it comes down to also. We are all accountable and responsible for ourselves. You can't change another human, even our children. And this is a good place I'd like to talk about that. Our natural reaction when people are in those situations is to say things like, why are you with him or her? What are you doing? Or why don't you leave, right? How do you think that sounds to someone who's already being talked to that way, right? Someone who's already being controlled. And so that, I know that's our natural reaction. Sometimes people will withhold their own relationships from victims because, well, I can't deal with you. You know, I'm not going to be in your life if you're going to be with him, creating an ultimatum. And those behaviors are actually the opposite of what we should do for the victims. You know, the victims need love. They need support. And I know that might feel foreign. It might feel like you're supporting them. I will say that my cousin, that her mother, that when she reached out to a local organization for domestic violence and said, what do I do? And the best piece of advice she was given was to just love her. When she comes to your house, make it fun, make it enjoyable, make her forget that whatever's happening in her home is happening, and just love her, just be there, because ultimately it was her choice to stay or to go, right? And so if you can create a space where they know they're safe and loved, and pray and hope that they just figure it out and they do it, because you can't change them. You can't change anyone, right? Even that. And so I love that piece of advice, because that wasn't my cousin's natural reaction. Her natural reaction was the second she got her, and try to shake her straight and tell her what to do. And that's not, and as therapists, that's what we do. We create a space where people are safe and guide them on their journey and help them, you know, empower them with whatever they need from us to make the choices and actions that they need for their lives.
So you've already alluded to this quite a bit throughout the interview, but I just want to really kind of give it the full airtime that it deserves. Can you please share whatever you are comfortable with in terms of your own personal connection to, and professional connection to, this very complex and pervasive issue?
Yeah, you know, from a personal aspect, you know, I will share my ex-husband and I were in a relationship that was very volatile. And I think that that's one of the biggest signs, the first signs that I missed. The high emotions, you know, the extreme emotions that we were engaging in, and to not recognize that as a problem, to me now professionally seems so obvious, but at the time it just seemed like big love, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's so much passion and so much, you know,
we care about each other so much, so that's why
so great,
so hard.
Yeah, and so it looked that way, right? But now I realize that there shouldn't be any sort of, you know, like volatile reactions. And so, and mine escalated to the point where I was isolated. I was at one point isolated from my family. And now that isolation then looked different than it does now. So I have clients that I'm working with that have been isolated online. You know, they have these online, you know, relationships that they've, you know, been told by their intimate partner, you know, don't talk to those people online, or don't be part of this group, or don't do that. And they do it, and they don't realize, they're like, oh, you know, they're a little jealous. Jealousy is not health. You know, jealousy is an emotion, and it's fine for us to feel that. You're always fine to feel emotion, but to act on it is a different story, right? It's okay to feel jealous. I mean, I'm jealous I don't have a yacht, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna act on it. You mean to people have a yacht, you know what I mean? So like, jealousy is an emotion, but acting on it is different, and behaving in ways that are controlling and abusive or controlling. And I think a lot of times it's power and control. If you just think of it as power and control, no one should have power and control over you in a healthy relationship in any way.
Right. And, you know, I think of that word jealousy over and over again, and it does actually sound very akin to insecurity as well, because when you think about it, you're feeling like there's a potential threat to your relationship or your control of the relationship, whatever it is. And there's a difference between being validated and having an emotion that is valid versus having an emotion that is true, per se, because emotions aren't really true or false. They just are. And the validity of that doesn't impact whether or not they are right or wrong.
Right, absolutely. And emotion's an emotion. You can't control what feeling you feel. You just feel it, right? It just happens. But what's what you do with that emotion that makes the difference.
I mean, just to kind of, to your point, I'm distraught that I wasn't born with super rich parents and that I'm not on a yacht myself. But you know, I get up every morning and I do my job because it's more exciting to see what I can do and be thankful for what I do have than to sulk and mope and maybe go rob a bank to get a new yacht.
Right, to worry about what I don't have. Exactly. No, exactly. So, and I know that's a very extreme example, but that's the thing. Like, jealousy has a place. Jealousy is an emotion. We all will feel jealousy at some point in our lives. You know, that's just an emotion. But it's that negative driving force of jealousy that gets us in trouble in those types of relationships.
My next question I have for you is, can you speak to the shame and stigma that might prevent someone who is in an abusive relationship or who thinks they're in an abusive relationship from coming forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the victim often, I know when I was a victim, I felt like shamed and embarrassed, but also I felt weak. And I think that sometimes that's a misconception too, that people perceive people in those relationships as weak, where the truth is, we actually have an incredible amount of strength because we believe that we can love the other person enough to change their behaviors. You know, we stay. That's why we stay. We believe that to our core, like we can change this. And so then the shame of having to tell someone else is what keeps us there sometimes, but it's also the shame in ourselves. Like, oh gosh, I can't believe I did this again, or I can't believe I listened to him or her, or I can't believe I came back, because people do see, you know, the outside is looking in, right? And so they see you maybe leave and come back and leave and come back, and, you know, they get caught in that cycle. And so it is veiled in shame. And so I hope that we can release that and help people understand that there are so many factors that come into play. And really at the core of it, it began with love, whether the other intimate partner, the abuser, felt the same, but the victim often does feel the love. You know, they want to be with this person for whatever reason. And so it's harder to leave and harder to make a change than people sometimes realize.
All right, and I have one more question. I think I have one more question for us before we close out. This is for anyone that might be watching right now, or anyone who knows someone that they are concerned about. If you are in an abusive relationship, or if you think you might be, or you know someone that you're concerned about, who, what, and where should we reach out for help and support?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the hotline.org is the domestic violence hotline that you can just Google that. You can go on their website, you can call them. The National Coalition for Domestic Violence, their phone number is 1-800-799-SAFE. Here locally, we have Safe Nest. It's a wonderful resource. You can go to their website. You can, again, these websites are safe to go to because they will immediately pop up and say, hey, if you need to get off of this, you know, you can click escape. And I also really encourage people to go to the One Love website. I can't preach about them enough. I think it's a wonderful organization, and they have such good information about healthy and unhealthy relationships. And I also think it's important that we have these conversations with our young people, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so when you're young and you're in love, or when you're old and you're in love, you know, it doesn't matter the age group, but I think that we as a society can create a better future and kind of, you know, decrease these behaviors in people, not just intimate relationships in people. What healthy relationships look like by really showing each other what a healthy relationships look like, and identifying when they're not and making changes.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, I mean, I wonder if part of it so much has to do with these, like we think of, like we talked about the power and control cycle a little bit, but I also think, you know, this is kind of a cycle that repeats itself throughout generations, because like you said, if all you have is mom and dad screaming and fighting and maybe punching throughout your entire childhood, what reason do you have to believe that that's not normal?
Right, that's all you know. That is your normal. If you grow up in that household, that is your normal. Right. And so it's a great point, because that is sometimes how it continues, because if you only know that as the way of life, then that's what you know, identify with as normal, and you continue that pattern. So this is the biggest part of change. And you and I talked about, you know, like ideally there'd be more laws or policies or different things, and that's a bigger scope, and there probably is a greater need for those things, but it's just like anything else. Those might be the superseding policies. That doesn't mean that's going to change individual behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I really believe that creating the awareness for each and every person on an individual basis is what's going to help us eliminate, I wish it eliminate, but at least decrease the, the acts of violence or the acts of emotional or psychological abuse.
Thank you so very much for being with us today. If anyone wants to contact you for potential counseling for this issue, how would they get a hold of you?
You can send me an email at info@melinda-powers.com. I forgot what my thing was. Oh, or you can go to my website. Wait, you're going to edit this. Ask me that again.
Do you have any sort of contact information you'd like to share with the audience if they might be looking for someone who's really knowledgeable on these issues, like a website or anything like that?
Sure. I have a website. It's melinda-powers.com.
Thank you. And they have all of your email, phone number, any of that kind of stuff that they might need?
Yep. It sure does. You can make an appointment directly from my website.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for being so open and honest. I know this is not an easy topic to talk about for anyone, whether or not they've been personally involved or whether they see it on their couch as a therapist or whatever, their family. It's not an easy issue to discuss for anybody because there is just so much pain. But I really appreciate that you were able to bring some light to this issue and really speak about, ways that we can make this a positive outcome instead of the negative one that so many people see.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and letting me speak on this. Because I have lost a family member, it is my way to honor her. And, I believe that her journey was her journey, and it is a lesson for all of us. And it's been a lesson for my family and for me personally. And so I think this is all part of it. There's a bigger plan. And so I think that, this is, in my view, my best way to honor her legacy and to help others. If I just one person hears this and one person, gets the help they need, then that's a win for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Did you like what you just saw? Make sure you like and subscribe. New videos come out every Tuesday.